Welcome to the Conduit Deeper podcast, a podcast that takes a deep dive into the details that surround our current sermon series, from current events to fascinating finds to conversations that take us deeper into the Word. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome to the Deeper Podcast. My name is Mo, Executive Pastor at Conduit Church, joined with our lead pastor, Darren Tyler, and it is April the 10th. It's Wednesday.
Did you survive the eclipse?
2 days past the total eclipse across America. We are here to tell about it. We survived.
And? There is no and, right? Like, I'm just...
I thought we weren't supposed to be here. Like, there was a lot of pressure on this eclipse. Like, if I'm the moon and I'm the sun, I'm feeling the pressure.
Yeah, I got to deliver something, like a tsunami. Like, I got to pull something out, you know?
There was an earthquake in New York the day before.
Yeah, but that just could be because God's ticked, you know? I mean, just be like you guys, like God thumping them on the back of the head in New York. Like,
it's just, I am exhausted from the eclipse. I'm exhausted from everybody talking about the eclipse. I'm exhausted from all the things that were supposed to happen that we all knew wasn't going to happen.
Well, I don't know that everybody knew it wasn't going to happen. There were some people very confidently predicting some things.
Weren't the red heifers supposed to be sacrificed this week? Hey, it's still this week. So.
Yeah, it's Wednesday, so in fairness, we could be eating ribeye by Friday. You know, red heifer ribeye is one of the finest cuts.
What were some other things that were supposed to happen? I feel like there was supposed to be wars and rumors of war, which that is always true, so I don't know if that has to really do with an eclipse.
You know, in the history of predicting the end of the world, and by the way, the 80s, 90s, we've got a rich history of predictions of that. And I wonder sometimes if it's part of the enemy strategy, so that because it becomes so silly that we actually then, the whole thing becomes silly. But it's not. Like, it's a very serious thing. Jesus is going to return. That's the thing.
Yeah.
He's promised it. But then everything becomes, a sign for it. So you begin to almost... you start looking at some of those scriptures about how the love of many will grow cold and could become mockers. And it's at the same time you think, okay, well, maybe that's part of the enemy's plan, was because some of this stuff is, so for instance, it's making an X over the United States.
That's right.
Okay. Now, for the record, over the last however many decades, the X thing happens all the time in eclipse patterns. It just isn't always on the United States.
Right.
So it starts with, okay, that makes if you thought that was the sign because it made and by the way, they said a cross. That's not a cross. It was an X.
No, it was an X over 7 years, right? The last one was 7 years ago.
Yeah, sure.
So 7, the number 7.
Sure.
It's making an X over the New Madrid fault line in the middle of America, over the Mississippi.
Right.
Out in Missouri somewhere. St. Louis specifically. There was supposed to be an earthquake.
Yeah.
I don't know that it got the memo. Are we mocking this?
We are. And I think we should feel bad, but I don't, because here's the thing. Critical thinking is not a gift of the Spirit. But it's what we're supposed to do. Like, it's not.
I enjoy critical thinking.
I do too. And
it's a lost art.
The older I get, like, the more I realize that, look, there are people that have very specific opinions about what the moon is or isn't. And I don't consider myself to be unread, like I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I'm not the dumbest. Some of this stuff, I'm like, I've never even heard of this, let alone taken it seriously.
I mean, the flat earthers were disappointed.
What were they hoping for?
I'm still trying to get to the bottom of this. How the eclipse is resolved amongst our flat earth friends. And I'm open to understanding. What was helpful is all the video that came back from our satellites and Elon's rocket that he sent up. Which is pretty awesome.
Impressive, right?
To see the eclipse from space.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, the argument there is always it's fake and it's all CGI. But anyways, there was a lot that was supposed to happen this week. There's been so much leading up to this. Did you get to watch it?
I did, actually. Ethan and I busted out onto the back deck. I was mid-sermon prep of something. And
Do you have proper sunwear?
no, I don't know if this counts, but I put it through the iPhone and was watching it through the iPhone.
Oh, okay.
Because if without, I don't know if you could see what you could see with it, but honestly, if you're just looking at it, what do we have, 95% coverage? 94. It was still pretty bright. Like it wasn't until I zoomed in with my iPhone. I'm like, oh, no, there it is. There's the little moon thing. But other than that, I would have never been able to have seen it without.
Gotcha. Yeah, we were driving back from a little Florida vacation, and so I was driving. I was keeping my head, keeping my eyes on the road. But we have a sunroof, which we dubbed the moonroof on the way back, that Jennifer was watching it up above, and she loved it. She thought it was so cool.
Did she have proper eyewear?
So she had glasses.
And you guys were, I don't know what your totality coverage would have been there, but it was further away.
Moving. Yeah, it was like, by the time it hit, we were in between Huntsville and in Chapel Hill somewhere on 65, like southern Tennessee, northern Alabama. Yeah. And so it was probably like 90%. But it was still pretty awesome.
I mean, here's the thing. God uses the stars and the firmament, all to tell stories sometimes. So it's true, 100%. But there's biblical backing for that. But to extrapolate out of that, like we're trying to create some new thing, like every time an eclipse happens or there's blood moons happening, or there's things that they're fun to talk about and think about, but
they're interesting.
Yeah, but to order the architecture of your life around them,
exhausting.
It is, and the truth is it's just not what. If you looked at what Jesus' advice to us was for this era, this time, he actually gives us the playbook of here's what you should do in these last days when they're there. And it's just Matthew 24 and 25. Feed the least of these brothers of mine. Clothe them, visit those who are in prison, the persecutions. It's literally that whole passage of the sheep and the goats is in the context of the last days. And if there's going to be wars and rumors of wars, that means there's going to be war refugees and there's going to be persecution, right? So we're going to need to help those who are persecuted. If there are famines in diverse places, then there's going to be hungry people. We need to be feeding those people. That's literally what he says that our job is. And so if that's happening, and if whether the eclipse is telling us the story or not, we have something to do. And so instead of standing and looking at the stars for the signs, we can, the leaves are changing. There's no question the leaves are changing, right? The season is changing. We should be about our Father's business. I don't mean it to sound silly, because of course we're going to go look at the eclipse, right? Like that. But if that's the 90% of the energy is looking up for an eclipse as opposed to looking around for where the kingdom of God can be expanded, we're just looking in the wrong place, Yeah. Get your glasses out, look at the sun and the moon. That was really cool. And now let's get back to work.
Yeah, back to work. It's an exciting week because there was an eclipse. It's also an exciting week because this is our 150th episode. Did you know that?
I had no idea. I promise, if you'd have put a gun to my head and said, pick how many episodes, I don't even know what I would have said.
We've done this 150 times over the course of 4 years, probably.
We're getting a little better at it. You'd think I think I'd be way better after that many episodes, but 50 episodes. Wow.
Yeah. Well, we started this, ironically, right the fall before the pandemic. So it was late fall of 19. And it was when we launched our Revelation series, which was a little fortuitous.
So no. You're remembering this wrong, which is very un-Mo-like.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I need a moment.
A moment?
Mo never remembers things wrong.
What am I
We
getting wrong?
didn't start the Revelation study till after the pandemic because I was in Nepal. If you remember this, and they wanted me to teach Revelation in 2019. Right. I'm like, God, can we not do Philippians or something? This is hard. And the realization that they wanted it because they're in intense persecution, so they read Revelation different. So while I was there, obviously our friend who's with us, his daughter died tragically, had to leave, yada, yada, yada. But I came back going, man, I feel like I need to go through Revelation again with our church, but through the eyes of the persecuted church.
So did we start it the first of the year?
We started it, and maybe I'm remembering, maybe I didn't hear you wrong or hear you right, but no, we started it right. So remember March 2020 hits, we were finishing a series of some kind. And we immediately pivoted to Romans 13, I think.
Romans 12.
12. And then we went to Revelation that summer.
Wow. Okay.
But and I almost didn't because I didn't want to sound like, oh, I'm a bandwagon Revelation guy. It was already planned to start Revelation in my heart and my mind. So it just landed perfectly that we, but yeah, it was June of 2020. I think if we didn't come back in June with Revelation, it was right after that we started Revelation.
Which means there is a Revelation series out there that was taught through 2020, which we went deep with. I mean, that was the launch of the Deeper podcast. We wanted to go deep into the book of Revelation.
That's right. That was it. Yep.
In the teaching on a Sunday and then a midweek podcast. And so if you're interested in the book of Revelation, there is our first iteration of this podcast. You can go back and listen
the archives
to that. And that's when we were doing all of this without a production team. It was just you and me in GarageBand in your home office.
That's right.
It was the audio probably was not very good.
I gotta believe it was terrible, right?
I'm pretty sure it was.
I think that we did have the Bill Lerwick intro, didn't we? By then,
I was using my voice. That's
at the beginning.
And then I was like, we should probably hire professionals.
Yeah.
And Bill is in our midst. And
I would give anything to just have Bill narrate my life.
Oh, it's so good. Such a great
not
voice.
Morgan. I mean, Morgan Freeman maybe would be second place, but Bill Lerwick narrating my life.
Shout out to Bill, who does our podcast intro. So yeah, 150 episodes. Thanks for those that have been joining us for this ride. It's a fun ride. Also, we're on the ride of this Genesis series. We're through chapter 3. Well done.
And they said it couldn't be done.
And we wrapped up chapter 3. Disintegration is the title, with the word sin embedded into disintegration, which is brilliant, by the way.
No, shoot me straight. Is it cheesy?
Nope.
Because I came so close to
it's really good.
So cheesy, but
no. One of our other guys that puts together some of our artwork, Gabe, did the graphic for the sermon and on our YouTube channel, and it pops so good. Like it ties it all together. Disintegration, sin within disintegration. I was like, okay, well done.
And it was one of those. That was a Saturday moment. Because I was texting. So Bobby Dodge, shout out Bobby, did the slides this week.
Yeah.
And we started, if you were here for the 9 a.m., you saw one of the images was of Olivia Newton-John, which he and I both thought was utterly hilarious. And then we lost it after that because it was a dud. But it was like Saturday. I'm like, hey man, I'm sorry, but I'm looking at this on a whiteboard and it jumped out at me. This is the sermon. This is the title. And he was gracious enough on a Saturday to change it for me.
What was if you could paint the picture for us quickly, disintegration, how are you deriving that from Genesis 3, and what does all of that include?
It includes, it's the description of what's happening in our world, like the second law of thermodynamics, right? The law of entropy, that nothing, it goes from order to disorder, right? Order to chaos. That's true in physics. It's true in the physical world. And it seems to be an indication that this is where it all started. But then that in our own private lives, so it's in the world, that's the law. And it turns out that in our world, it's the law. And what really jumped at me was, I mean, if it's probably as far back as like the late 1800s, early 1900s, when thinkers and philosophers decided that to do away with even the concept of sin. And you've seen that play out over our lifetimes, because they had this idea. In fact, something that didn't make it into the sermon that's in front of me right now it's actually a synopsis. It's of, if you're a secular humanist thinker, you think that we are good inside, and so all we have to do is just solve for X. So it's the social problems, it's the war problems, if we can just solve the systems and get rid of the evil government, as if the government is an it, not a who. But over 100 years, that philosophy has ran into a little wall called reality, and it doesn't mix with the way reality works, as opposed to Genesis 3. That actually explains reality. But H.G. Wells, right, the War of the Worlds guy, in 1937, we're post-World War I, we're post-War of the Worlds, right? He's famous by now, and he writes this: "Can we doubt that presently our race will more than realize our boldest ambitions, that it will achieve unity and peace, that our children will live in a world made more splendid and lovely than any palace or garden that we know, going from strength to strength in an ever-widening circle of achievement. This is just total blind optimism. What man has done, the little triumphs of his present state form but the prelude to the things that man has yet to do. This is from his book, A Short History of the World in 1937.
So hopeful.
10 years later. Now, keeping in mind, 1937, this is 1946 now, World War II. His philosophy ran into reality. He says, the cold-blooded massacre of the defenseless, the return of deliberate and organized torture, mental torment, and fear to a world from which such things had seemed well nigh banished, has come near to breaking my spirit altogether. Homo sapiens, as he has been pleased to call himself, is played out. And that's from a mind at the end of its tether in 1946. And I wonder if, so that's a brief, short synopsis of a bigger, because it took him only 10 years to figure that out. I wonder if that is what the 90s represented to a lot of us. I was in the music business in the 90s. You were like 4 years old in the 90s.
No.
Just kidding. You were not far, but it was, in America anyway, the 90s was a really good time. Like financially, we'd come out of a recession. Of course now, we looked at Bill Clinton as like the evil incarnate. Now I'm like, oh, I'd take that guy over any of the options I have now, even though I don't like him either. But there was this time of peace and certainty, I think. Naivete maybe is the best word. And then even, look, we get to, it's going to be Y2K. The whole world is going to shut down, right? So people start storing stuff in there. And then that didn't happen. And we're like, wow, we might be immortal here. Like this, we might have achieved something in society. And then, of course, 9/11 happened. The economy collapses. 2008, it was like this brief little snippet. And by the way, only in America. If you were to ask, the Rwandans whether the 90s were great, they have different opinions. If you were to ask the people in Myanmar what was going on in the 90s. But in our little myopic, self-centered, narcissistic ideology that America is the center of the world, we had a good run that came to an end. And so it could be almost like the way that he's playing it out here, H.G. Wells, right? Which is that that was dumb. We are not creating it, the humans. And that's why I played the Joe Rogan clip again. I'm going to give Rogan a break for a few weeks. But he, in a nutshell, is explaining the problem, that we are, as a humanity, the wars, the history of wars, peace is the exception, not the rule. And that is all hopeless unless there's some other being, supernatural entity outside of us that can rescue us. And that's where Genesis 3 comes in.
You highlighted an article from The Atlantic called "The True Cost of the Church Going Bust." And speaking of the 90s, because it's an article that came out last week, again in The Atlantic, and it details the decline in church going, which was a significant trend in the U.S. beginning in the 90s.
Yeah.
And that it saw a sharp increase of the number of Americans with no religious affiliation. So while the world is, well, not the world, America is profitable in that time, peacetime, stocks and bonds and corporations and everything, everybody's making money. This article suggests that people started to pull away from the church, that attendance declined. Not only did attendance just declining, they felt like they didn't have a need for it and claimed no religious affiliation during that time.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It goes on to say that an estimated 40 million people, 1 in 8 Americans, stopped going to church in the past 25 years.
Say that again. How many? 1 in 8?
1 in 8. 40 million have stopped attending church in the past 25 years, making it the largest concentrated change in church attendance in American history. So basically, he's saying from 1990 to, almost now, 2015-ish, 2020, seen a sharp decrease. But it started in the 90s, so I think all these things combined, it's interesting to see where our allegiances lie. It's also interesting that if you remember, and of course you do, because this was when you were really starting to kick off in your career. In the 90s is when the churches went all in.
Yeah.
They doubled down.
Yeah.
With opportunity, concerts, concert halls, clubhouses, coffee houses, climbing walls for the kids. I mean, playhouses, these monstrosities, like mega churches were being built all through the 90s.
Yep.
What would you say like a typical church size, venue size was back then? Like when you were doing concerts with your artists, I mean, there was handfuls, more than handfuls of churches across the country that had seating capacities north of 10,000.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you would look out a tour routing, now those were eras too where we were trying to get into, to more theaters, civic centers, like with actual crew that knew what they were doing. It made it excessively expensive, I might add, to go that way. But so the church that I grew up, I say grew up, that's not fair, that sort of formed me a little bit was a church called Church on the Move in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The pastor, Willie George, it's where Jim Weidman came from. And Willie had a really good heart for, and a pure heart, I think pure. Actually, none of us have pure hearts. We have purer motives, not
good
pure
intentions.
Motives. Good intentions. But his intention was like, our youth ministry is struggling. And so he actually fired his youth pastor and became the youth pastor for the next year. His church at this point was a couple thousand people, maybe 3, and then decided that they were going to go all in, and they called it 180. You make a 180, come back to Jesus. They hired Blaine Bartell. They bring in what ended up happening during the next 5 to 10 years were churches like Church on the Move in a competition who could spend the most money on their youth facilities. And we're talking tens of millions of dollars. So that's Resurrection Life Church in Grand Rapids, Church on the Move in Tulsa. Oh, there was one in Dallas. I can't remember the name of it. Covenant Church in Dallas. And the 10, 12 million. And again, good intentions. So what Willie said was, if you want to be a quote unquote 180 youth group, in fact, Bethel here in Franklin or Brentwood did this. The pastor has to become the youth pastor for at least 6 months, walking beside your youth pastor. These are all great intentions. But, of course there's a but. There was no discipleship coming in. Mm-hmm. And we felt it, like the generation of Michael W., Stephen Curtis, they grew up in a church where they would have had a Sunday school, they would have had discipleship, and so they know the Word of God. And then the generation that I started working with that was in the late 90s, early 2000s, they didn't know the difference between Noah and Jonah. They were going to youth group. So again, the good intentions were there, but there was no discipleship, no understanding of what the gospel is. And it's like when Peter, he says, "Are you going to leave now?" To Peter, he's like, "Where else would I go? It's you have the words of life." He didn't say, "Where else would I go?" You have the water slide. You have this awesome rock climbing wall in your lobby. Where else would I go? And the answer is, I'd go to the other place where there's a rock climbing wall, or I'd go to another place where there's a slide. Whatever you win them with is what you've got to keep them with. But what happened, and ironically, and it makes me angry, is Derek Thompson, this guy that writes this piece. He's worked for the Atlantic for a while. He's an agnostic. He calls himself that in this article. And he's the religion reporter for the Atlantic. So that tells you everything you need to know about the Atlantic is that they would choose someone who hates religion to be the religion reporter. So some of what he writes is not fair. And some of what he writes is accurate, like this is what happened, but his why of what happened and what we do about it are antithetical to reality or the gospel.
Yeah, it's just interesting that in the 90s, all this money was poured into these facilities. It was what was called maybe an attractional gospel, seeker-friendly. Yeah,
there's different phrases. The word seeker-sensitive became a little, off-putting for some, so they started going for attractional. Mm-hmm. And by the way, to that end, like even on Sundays, like I remember Willie saying, we don't do special events this was after we stopped doing concerts or whatever. He went to, we're not doing special events. Every Sunday is a special event. Mm-hmm. So they began to treat their Sundays as the evangelistic outreach.
Do you remember during worship services at some of these mega churches or these larger churches, the attractional churches, seeker-sensitive, seeker-friendly churches, where they would do like a cover song of a current, of a current radio hit?
They'd open up the service with it, like a super average cover of like a Toto song,
Or back in the day, it was like they would open up with like a Creed song, and then
Can you take me higher?
and then go right into like, Trading My Sorrows.
We'd be trading your opening song, man. We need to be trading out on. Yeah, we wanted to be relevant, man. Yeah, the problem with relevant is the gospel is never meant to be relevant. Like that's is culturally relevant, right? It's meant to be true. Culture be damned. Like whatever the culture's saying, culture changes.
And so all that effort, all the money, all that effort went into it. And then there is a notable, traceable, trackable statistic that shows attendance declined over the next decade of all of that.
Yeah. And I had an experience that it actually it became the exit for me. It was in a church in Billings, Montana, which probably should remain nameless. We were there on a Cutlass tour. So I was doing the math, by the way, and going, okay, all my contemporaries, my colleagues, they're all wanting to play these theaters and venues, and I'm doing the math on a tour going, I mean, we could literally shave our expenses by 35% if we partnered with local churches.
Yeah.
And again, sounded great on paper. And the idea then that by that point, so the 2001, 2, 3, during that era, the banks had discovered this whole new marketplace of opportunity, which were called churches.
Yeah.
So, you and I could start a church down the road and somehow walk out with a $15 million mortgage to build this brand new whatever, because banks had no idea. So there were churches everywhere. And this one in Billings was a 1,800 seater in Billings. Theater seating, it had a load-in dock for semis. It was literally made for events like this. So I'm like, this is awesome. We played that tour. Almost every venue was a church like that, 2 to 2,500 loading docks. But it was I don't know why it was Billings, but some reason I was in Billings. It might have been that I just got done reading, I think Richard Stern's There's a Hole in Our Gospel. I'm like, they were so excited to tell me they spent $28 million on this facility. This was 2007 or 8. And I'm going, wait a minute, I wonder what the monthly payment on a $28 million building is with 1,800 seats. And I don't know why, but in that moment, there was a moment for me. It was like, what am I doing here? Like, it is above me, my pay grade. I am not Holy Spirit Jr., right? To say that church was wrong to do the mortgage of that size. That is just, again, it's not my job to say that. I don't know. I just know that what you're pointing out is the hundreds of millions of dollars. And parenthetically, there's an article, I'm sure you can still find at Wall Street Journal around 2009, of the coming waves of foreclosures on churches. Mm-hmm. And it was all over, like 5,000 to 7,000 seat churches that are now bulldozed and gone. Carpenter's Home Church in Lakeland, Florida being one, 8,000 seats. It's condos there now. But somebody at some point used their money, put it into their hands of God's money, and trusted that they would make the right decision. And those are all gone. And what you just said, right, is that you would think with that kind of investment, that Christianity would be on the increase in America, not the decrease. And it's the antithesis of that. The more we spent, the more event we came, the less impact we had for eternity. It's counterintuitive, but
and the goal of these big churches and event centers and community centers was to create community, right? I mean, some sort of integration of community, of the spiritual, the social, all of these things. But it was like really good intentions, but not thought all the way
bad
through.
Execution, right? Like the intentions because I think they would have said, I think if you had asked them, they would have said, and I say they very loosely, it was about reaching people. We can reach more people. I don't think anybody thought much past that. they didn't even define what it meant to reach them.
Right.
Like, how do I know they've been reached?
Well, yeah, I mean, in the SBC, in the Southern Baptist world, that meant a salvation and baptism, of which were counted, and quite frankly, competitions were made out of it across the country. You would receive a plaque if you had the most salvations and baptisms in your region.
Oh, I didn't know. You got a little plaque?
100%.
I didn't get a plaque. I guess I wasn't,
like
I wasn't Baptist, so.
If your region, they broke them down by regions and state. And so if you had the most conversions, what was called conversions, you would get a plaque suitable for framing on your wall.
I guess the discipleship piece is so important that we just missed it. And hindsight is 20/20. I genuinely have no judgment for anybody in that world, in that era. I was in it. What we have to at some point realize is that it didn't deal with the core issue of all of us, which is at the core of each of us is sin. And at the core of each of us, that's what salvation is for. And this is surely a truth, right? The message doesn't change, even though the methods might. But I think what happened in the 90s was that the method and the message changed. And the message has to be the message of Jesus, or it's just some other religion, and we might as well all go home.
The article goes on to point out that many Americans have not found alternative methods to build a sense of community outside of the church, which is really interesting, and I don't think that's accurate. I was listening to the All In podcast. Are you familiar with the All In podcast?
Yep, I am.
It's the number one podcast in the world, apparently, or like top 10.
Ahead of Rogan?
Like recently, it is up there.
Interesting.
These things fluctuate, but
it's
like it's one of the top in the world. All In podcast. It's a bunch of business guys. Really rich business guys.
Yeah. I've listened to it a few times, and I find it to be hilarious when you hear billionaires roasting each other.
Yeah, they're billionaires. Like, there's 4 guys. 2 of them are conservative, 2 of them are liberal, which makes it really interesting when you listen to it through the knowing that these are billionaire moneymakers on both sides of the aisle, per se. But they were talking about some of this week. They were talking about how it was crucial for their business model as a podcast to do live events. And they were just talking about how it's important for all these other podcasts and these specific niches to do these conventions. So like they have an all-in convention. They were referencing Comic-Con, of how these conventions are so important because it's, quote unquote, the only way for like-minded people to find community. The idea of a church body is so distant to them. Like, it's not even on their radar.
Didn't even come across their mind.
Didn't even come across the idea of a church family, a church community that within a church body is a community of like-minded people that are coming together to do life together.
Right. Well, and I would suggest, by the way, that's why Genesis 3 matters, because so they're saying we need community. That's what will, they wouldn't maybe say save us, but communities, we're lonely. We need this. What I pointed out through the Genesis 3, where there are these 4 symptoms of sin. So the disease is sin and the rest are symptoms, right? So if you're trying to just treat for symptoms, put together a Comic-Con. But just like when you're treating for a symptom, as soon as the Advil wears off, the disease is still there. So the headache comes back, right? The ear infection, unless you treat the disease itself. And so the symptoms are spiritual, right? The angst, the not just loneliness, like a cosmic, like it's a spiritual disconnect that people feel. Psychological, which is what most people are talking about right now with emotional and mental health. Social, which is we're going to get our government to fix the problems. Like that's what one of the symptoms right now is that in a society there's inequity, there's racism. These are all true, and it's all symptoms of the sin disease. And then physiological, like the physical of just even in our world of like we are working hard and not getting the results. That's all part of the fall, all part of the symptoms of the disintegration. And what and maybe this is probably, and now that I think about it, saying it out loud, this is the 90s in the church world. We were trying to solve one of these symptoms, just like David Sachs in the All In podcast, right? There's, if we just have some events, then we will solve for loneliness.
Yeah, it's true.
But it doesn't deal with the spiritual, doesn't deal with the psychological, doesn't deal with the physical. All four of those are dealt with in the gospel, because all four of those are what we are disintegrated from in Genesis 3. The world changed. We don't live in the Genesis 2 world anymore. We're in this world where those four things, and any ideology that goes for just one, even two of them, is reductionistic, it's oversimplified, and it doesn't work.
The article also suggests that the decline of faith in church going has contributed to the rise of hyper-individualism in the U.S., which to me is such a broad stroke to dump that on the church per se.
It's such a Derek Thompson thing to say. I've been reading this guy. I actually had to stop for a while because my Apple Watch would tell me, this guy's kind of ticking you off.
Your heart rate's up?
Yeah, because I just want to wring his neck. I'm like, I don't do well with illogic presented as logic, and that's arrogance on my part. I understand. I need to repent of it. But man, he makes me mad.
Yeah, I mean, the hyper-individualism in the U.S. is for sure a thing.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's ramped up over the past 2 decades. But to contribute that to the fact that folks aren't going to church, there's far larger forces at play here.
Yeah.
Culturally.
Well, Derek, and I don't know if he's ever said it out loud. I can't remember. I feel like he said it in some tweets, but very socialist leanings, leftist. So you would hear, hyper-individualism. So I'm guessing he's going to say, then the solution's got to be more government programs, because then that's how we solve it, is if the government can fix this hyper-individualism of the evils of capitalism, then we'll be okay. Like solve for the social that way.
It's confusing because it's kind of out of the both sides of their mouth, because isn't the woke ideology individualism and also socialistic at the same time? Like the woke ideology is everybody is their own thing. You can be whatever you want. And it's pushed and pushed and pushed at every facet across the board, while at the same time pursuing this social integration together.
Yeah. And getting the government to solve the problems, quote unquote, their problems.
It's a mess.
Which are, by the way, psychological.
Yes.
You know, if I look in the mirror and think I'm a woman, that's a psychological issue. That's called body dysmorphia. It's diagnosable even in some places. But the idea of we're going to solve the psychological instead of repenting, you know, Rosaria Butterfield, if you've not read any of her work, it's worth your time. She was a tenured professor at a liberal university, openly living an openly lesbian lifestyle, married, and comes to faith in Christ. She's now a pastor's wife, has been for, I think, the last 20 years. But the psychological, that's, you know, trying to solve for the psychological is to say, well, that's just who I am. Instead of saying, I'm hearing thoughts in my head that are not real, so I need to deal with that. It's like, no, this is just who I am, and creates a bigger prison, not a smaller prison. And then you get things like what's happening in the UK right now, which is they put a law in. I've actually never read a Harry Potter book.
Neither have I.
But J.K. Rowling she's punk rock, man. She's liberal, you know, leftist, whatever, but even she sees the madness of it. And so she's, you know, her tweets, and by the way, her tweets are like, a man can't be a woman. Those are not controversial, but in this new UK law, she could be arrested as hate speech for that.
Wow.
So she's tweeting now, come get me, arrest me, you know where I live. Like, she's punk rock. And of course they're not going to, because they don't have that kind of courage.
Yeah, I mean, those UK laws are also similar to some newer Canadian laws, where you can't say that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah, because, you know, you've, again, treating the psychological with the social, you know, so we've got the government coming here saying, here's how we're going to fix the psychology of it. No mention of any spiritual, like David Sachs, right? They're trying to solve just the social thing. David Sachs meaning All In podcast. Yeah. I don't even know if it was him that said it.
Yeah, I mean, they were all talking about it. They were super. They were actually the reason they were talking about it because they were referencing the book that we talked about last week that you had mentioned in last week's teaching from Haidt or Haidt.
I think it's Haidt.
Jonathan Haidt.
It should be Haidt because it doesn't, you know. But anyway, it's Haidt.
The rewiring of your brain, and they were talking about that and how they're so concerned about loneliness in this generation that's coming up that's attached to smartphones and again the disintegration, the splintering of community and relationship.
Yeah.
And they're like, man, one of the only ways that we know that we can have hope is finding like-minded people within live events and gathering together over certain hobbies and niches. And it's like, here's an idea, maybe the church.
Yeah, because the spiritual aspect of it, and to be specific, church in and of itself doesn't solve it. It's church ecclesia the way that God designed it, right?
Yes.
Which is why,
Yes.
I want to say this right and carefully, you can be a conservative without being a Christian, okay? We see that all over the place. But it doesn't mean that you've got it figured out. So now you're using conservatism as your whatever, community, your salvation. So you can be a conservative without being a Christian, but you can't be a Christian without being a conservative, meaning Christianity is all about conserving. We're conserving the original inerrant Word of God. We are conserving Jesus' teachings. Like that is, so you can't be a Christian without being a conservative. It just, being a Christian and being a conservative means now I know what I'm conserving. I'm not just conserving everything. I'm conserving God's truth, God's promises, God's love, His salvation, the gospel. That's what we're conserving. And it's why progressive Christianity is so damnable, because it's not conserving Jesus' teachings. It's adding to them, which is exactly what Mormonism does. They are not just another denomination. They are a brand new, quote unquote, testament to the words of Jesus. It's what Islam is, right? It's a brand new testament, almost 600 years after Jesus' ascension. Who are you going to listen to? The guys that were actually there and saw it and wrote it down? Or are you going to listen to the guy that came along 2,000 years later and had a vision in Missouri in a wagon train and then started marrying all of his nieces? Like, are you going to listen to that guy? Or do we listen to the original? So conservative as a Christian means I'm conserving Genesis 3, that you have, everybody in this room has an original sin nature, and that is what Jesus has come to save us from. That's why He didn't come just to teach us how to be better people. He had to come to save us from the people that we are.
One of the other ways that people have found community outside the church is through youth sports.
Coach Mo.
Coach Mo. I am a coach. I enjoy coaching. I've been coaching some level, some sport, some form or fashion for the past 15, 20 years. I love it. I'll do it again this fall. I got invited back to coach football, middle school football last week.
Not just middle school football, Brentwood middle school football.
It's its own subculture.
How many fleece vests per capita are you thinking?
I mean, it is almost all of them.
And Land Rovers? 50%, 50-50 Land Rover?
Oh, it's way over 50%. When I drive onto this particular campus, I'm not going to say the school, but when I drive over to the campus, I stick out like a sore thumb.
You're pulling up. Well, you got a Tundra now?
I know it's
utilitarian.
Truck.
Yeah,
I'm definitely pulling up in the black truck.
Are people trying to hire you to mow their lawns?
Yeah, it's like it's not a Tesla or these cars are so expensive, and the kids are all driving them, which is
it makes it even funnier, don't it?
They're all $70,000 cars or more. It's unbelievable. It's a whole thing. But being on the front lines of youth sports, it's become for sure a way that folks are trying to find a community, and they are getting a sense of community.
Yeah.
But like you said, it doesn't check all four boxes.
Yeah, because the quest becomes for community and not for Christ.
Yeah.
Like if you just go for community without Christ, you still haven't solved any of the other problems in your life. If you seek Christ, then community comes with that. And the community is one of the most durable, because the community says that, Caleb and Micah and Mo and Darren, like we all start on the same level playing field. Like we all were in need of the same salvation. Like that's true community. Whether you have a Land Rover or not, we have a true community. And what happens in a quest for community without Christ is exclusionary on its very face, because if I don't believe with this or whatever, then I'm already out. So you spend your whole life trying to find that, whatever, community. And when you put Christ in the middle of it, it's why Acts chapter 2, I've romanticized it myself, but it wasn't romantic. They were there because they were being persecuted, crushed on all sides. They came together out of a sense of survival, right? But of mission. And there's a unity that happens in something like that. And I pray that that's not what happens in our nation. But in a country that has more than we need everywhere we look, the result has been we have less than we need because we're busy pursuing, and look, it's not that youth sports is an evil thing, and I know you're not saying that because you're coaching it, and I don't believe it because it's not true. Mm-hmm. But if it becomes your community without Christ, it's why you get parents being kicked out of games and yelling and screaming at you.
Yeah, I just saw a video yesterday where there's a town out east. It's in like Boston area or something like that, where if they're trying, so one of the issues in youth sports is baseball games and basketball games, but specifically baseball games is parents yelling at the refs, at the umpires, right? It is unbelievable because most of these umpires, they're not getting paid hardly anything per game comparatively.
Yeah.
For the amount of time and skill and expertise, understanding the rule book and executing a game. So one of the new rules is if a parent gets to the point where they get ejected from a game for yelling at an umpire, they then have to serve as an umpire for 3 games themselves to be allowed back on the field with their kid.
Where is this at? That's a pretty good little rule.
It's out east. It's in Massachusetts somewhere.
Of course, it's Boston.
Yeah. Oh, can you imagine Boston parents?
You're messing with my kid.
All kinds of language, I'm sure.
Oh,
but it's the first. Like, there's literally a movement. It's so bad that here in Williamson County that they can't find people to ref basketball games because they're getting yelled at. Young producer Micah over here used to referee youth basketball games and would just get hosed from parents before and during and halftime and afterwards, walk to his car and just yelling at him for their kid's 7-year-old basketball game.
It feels like amateur night at the Apollo for white people.
It's so
like,
bad.
I don't know if you've ever seen amateur night at the Apollo, like back in the 90s, but the comedians would walk out there. And it was in Harlem, and if you bombed or started bombing, they would literally boo you off the stage. It was horrible, but it made really great comedians coming out of there. Eddie Murphy comes out of that. But anyway, in the youth sports world, like,
so unhealthy.
And I guess, if you're looking whether you've made it a religion, how many times have you yelled at a ref? But I mean, the point being that even if they made the wrong call, I make the wrong call all the time. It's just life.
Yeah.
But to treat it like, your kid has been exposed in a government secret scandal, and it's like you got a 1 problem being treated with a 10 reaction. So a scale of 1 to 10, right? How big is this problem? Scale of 1 to 10. What's your reaction?
I mean, it's a form of idolatry. We just need to call it what it is.
Worship, yeah,
it's a form of idolatry and worship, and it's a multi-billion-dollar industry that is wrought with all kinds of issues, and I could talk about it for a long time. But the point is, it's just an example of people finding community and it not being a holistic pursuit of community, which was what we're suggesting, within the church, within a church family. So I guess we can get to solutions. So what is the solution? One of the solutions is that we be involved in community here within a church family. Wherever you listen, wherever you live, if you're involved with your church in some way, whether you're serving, whether you're a part of a team, you just attend, you actually show up, and you're with like-minded people. There's a holistic version of this that does check these 4 boxes: the spiritual, the psychological, the social, the physical. That's hard to find anywhere else.
I would say impossible. It's one of the things that Derek Thompson's logic fails on, is if it's just about getting people in a room at the same time, like-minded people in the room, same time. That's called a public school. And it's not working if that's not happening. So if that's what you're looking for, there's no community that is durable enough to survive that, because it doesn't solve. The play for community is really a cry to solve the lonely cry of your heart. That's where community comes in. And what we have discovered at Conduit, somewhat inadvertently, I think, is that a community based around mission, there's something deeper to that. That's why we don't ask people to join the church. I mean, join what? We can get you a certificate suitable for framing next to your how many people got saved last year. But we're saying, do you want to join our church, but do you want to be a part of this mission? Like, if whoever's parking cars this Sunday, slaves are going to go free that week. He gets a part of that. Like, there's a part of getting people in the door. Just over the last month, everybody that made it in here that was bringing in their baby bottles, there's somebody that greeted him, someone made him coffee. And so, but together we saved the lives of, we don't know how many unborn children's lives will be changed because of what happened in the month of March as a group of Jesus people coming together. And even that without Christ still doesn't ultimately fulfill it, because what we cry the most for, it's Psalms, right? It's as the deer pants for the water, so my soul cries for you. It's not David saying his soul personally. He's making a demonstrably true statement that all of us have that thirst. And that began in Genesis 3. There's now a thirst for a connection and intimacy back with God. And once that's there, the rest of it grows out of that. Community growing out of Christ, mental health growing out of Christ. It deals with all of them. But it has to start with not just Christ, but the gospel and the Jesus of the Bible, not the one that we've created in our own image, but the one that he wants us to be created in his image.
One of the things that I've noticed recently in a lot of humanist language, socialist language, is they're not saying the word sin.
Yeah.
And we talked about this last week a little bit, but they're using the word flaw, and it's all over the place. Like, that's the buzzword right now, is how can we remove the flaw within humanity? And that's the hope of AI, can remove the flaw of unintelligence. We would stop making these terrible decisions. So if a computer was smart enough, so powerful, that it could remove the flaws, that we could restore humanity.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
Because the irony of all ironies is that the computers are created by the very brains they're trying to fix.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Do you know what I mean? So you can't solve the problem, inside the problem. You have to go outside of the problem to solve it.
The hope is that it would. Their hope is that.
Yeah. I mean, that's that Joe Rogan clip that I played, was he correctly identifies in 1 minute the problem of the entirety of the history of humanity. And he starts talking about, we need like some sort of intelligent being outside of ourselves. He's describing God. He says, and that's what AI is going to do. We're going to have a computer that is so smart that it's going to fix us.
So close.
Like, if that's your hope, and keeping in mind, he's a guy that's terrified of AI. I mean, he should be. We all should be, as far as a computer intelligence.
Oh, it's coming.
That is, that's self-learning and whatever. I mean, because it doesn't have a soul, it doesn't have a conscience, it doesn't have morals. It's only what it's been told and programmed to have. And if it's programmed, an imperfect system programmed by is imperfect because it's programmed by imperfect people. Only God, right, the perfect, intelligent outside being, whatever you want to call him, is perfect. And I was watching it and thinking, man, he's about to proclaim Christ, and then he proclaims AI. I'm like, oh man, the journey continues for Joe Rogan.
The journey continues.
And look, if I believe that's probably Elon Musk's idea, is we can program this. It's almost like as if they started at one point when Francis Collins decoded the genome and realized that it was a code. That became the new thing. Well, now we just got to fix the code.
Yeah.
As opposed to, there is a virus that has been introduced into our operating system. And until that virus is removed, this computer is always going to get shut down. Like, it drives it into the ground. The virus is there, the Stuxnet of sin in our bodies.
Well, they're working on it, and if you're interested in some of that conversation, we actually talked about it last week. You can go back and listen or watch on our YouTube channel. Chapter 3 completed, heading into chapter 4 of Genesis. What's next? What's this Sunday?
Sin is crouching at the door, is what he says to Cain. It's this picture of you do sin, and then sin does you. I don't know how else to say it.
Interesting.
It might be oversimplified, but it actually is kind of a little bit of what addiction is. When you ask Mike Coop from Place of Hope, as an alcoholic, is it a sin or is it a disease? And his answer is yes. And what he means is that it started as sin because you made decisions and then it becomes a disease because it's rewired. It literally physically alters your brain. Now it can be rewired, all that, but it started as sin where you were doing sin, and then it ends with sin doing you. And the other thing that he says, Coop says, is that an addiction itself, alcohol, drugs, is a 100% fatal disease unless you get help. It will kill you. Might be now, might be later. But you're going to do sin, or sin is going to do you. And so we're going to actually talk about sin as like a presence, it's like a roaring lion is what Peter calls, Satan in the New Testament, whom he may devour.
Yeah.
But the language that he uses there in Genesis 4 is the language of like a predator hunting you down with it. And what do we do about that?
Our sin, our flaws. Are you going to use flaws?
No, because it's just a euphemism, right? That it literally castrates the actual power and strength of what sin really does. And again, flaw makes it where now we're just dealing with the psychological part of it. So we're only dealing with one. You're not dealing with the cosmic loneliness of being without Christ.
This Sunday we'll continue through the gospel according to God through the book of Genesis. Thank you for watching. Those that are been on YouTube and checking it out, thank you for doing that. And thank you for joining us on our 150th episode of the Deeper Podcast. That's exciting as we continue to go through book by book, chapter by chapter through the Bible and discussing it, obviously, through this podcast. If you want more information about what we're doing with the mission, go to conduitmission.org. There are plenty of ways for you to get involved and be a part of the mission, locking arms with us in these projects, with these projects. And of course, ConduitChurch.com for all the information you could want to know about Conduit here in Franklin, Tennessee. One last thing. If you get a chance, would you mind leaving a 5-star review? This helps us get the word out about the podcast. This helps it spread as we dive into the word each and every week. Your review, leaving a 5-star, goes a really long way. So we really appreciate you listening. We appreciate you doing that. So thank you on behalf of the Deeper Podcast.